The day you always knew was coming finally comes. And somehow, despite knowing it was coming for years, despite watching it approach slowly through school years and graduations and packed boxes and tearful goodbyes at doorsteps, nothing quite prepares you for the moment you close the front door and turn around and face the house, yet in a way it has never been quiet before. People will tell you things, of course. They always do. They will say, "Oh, you will love the freedom." They will say, "Finally, time for yourself." They will say, "It gets easier, give it a few weeks." They will say, "Be proud, you raised them well enough to leave." And all of those things may eventually be true. But in that first silence, none of them reach the actual feeling, because the actual feeling is something most people never find the right words for. It is not simply sadness. It is not simply loneliness. It is something more complicated and more specific than either of those words can hold. It is the sudden, disorienting absence of a weight you have been carrying so long. You forgot it was weight. Think about what your daily life looked like for the last 20, 25, perhaps 30 years. The mornings structured around someone else's schedule. The meals planned around someone else's preferences. The evenings shaped by homework or activities or the simple, ordinary gravitational pull of another human being living under the same roof as you. Every room in the house held a function that was connected to them. The kitchen was not just a kitchen. It was the place where lunches got made and dinners got argued over, and conversations happened at odd hours when they finally decided to talk. The living room was not just a living room. It was where the family landed at the end of days, where noise lived, where the evidence of shared life accumulated in comfortable, familiar disorder. And now every room is exactly as you left it. The kitchen stays clean, the living room stays arranged. Nothing moves unless you move it. And that stillness is one of the strangest things a human being can experience after decades of organized chaos. Here's what nobody tells you about that stillness. It is not just quiet. It is loud in a completely different way. Because what fills the silence is not nothing. What fills the silence is memory. Every room holds echoes of a version of your life that no longer exists in the same form. The scuff on the wall by the stairs that you always meant to paint over. The particular creak of a floorboard at the end of the hall. The way certain light falls through a window at a specific hour of the afternoon and lands exactly where someone used to sit. Those things remain after the person has gone, and they speak. Quietly, persistently, in a language that is entirely private, entirely yours, and entirely impossible to explain to someone who has not lived it themselves. That is why so many parents feel profoundly alone in this experience. Not because nobody cares, but because the grief is so specific, so textured, so woven into the physical details of a particular house and a particular life that it resists being shared easily. It lives in the details. And details are hard to translate. And then there is the identity piece. The part that catches most people entirely off guard. Because for decades, a significant portion of who you were was defined by being needed in a particular way. Not just needed in the abstract, needed specifically, needed at 7 a.m. when someone could not find their keys. Needed at 11 p.m. when something went wrong and there was nowhere else to turn. Needed on the ordinary Tuesday afternoons when nothing was wrong at all, but the simple fact of your presence was the thing that made the house feel like home. That kind of being needed is not just a function, it is an identity. It gives the days their shape. It gives the self its purpose in a very concrete, daily, undeniable way. And when it shifts, the days lose their shape for a while. You wake up and the morning has no particular structure demanding anything from you. You make breakfast for one, and the portion size feels wrong, in a way that seems too small to be important, but somehow is not. You move through rooms that no longer require anything from you, and you find yourself not quite sure what to do with the freedom, because freedom, it turns out, is complicated when you have not had it for 30 years. Psychologists have studied this transition extensively. And what the research consistently finds is that the difficulty of the empty nest period has very little to do with how much you love your children or how successful you were as a parent. It has to do with something much more for fundamental identity disruption. For most parents, especially those whose lives were heavily oriented around the daily work of raising children, the departure of the last child represents one of the most significant identity shifts of adult life. Not because the parenting ends, parenting never ends, but because the daily physical practical expression of that parenting suddenly disappears. And the self that was built around that daily expression has to find new ways of existing, new structures, new sources of meaning, new answers to the question that the busyness of active parenting kept successfully at bay for decades. Who am I when the house is quiet? I want to talk about something that rarely gets discussed honestly in conversations about this transition. The complicated feelings. Because it is not only grief. For many parents, the silence also carries something that is harder to admit out loud. A strange, guilty, confusing mixture of grief and relief. Relief that the daily pressure has lifted. Relief that the constant vigilance, the ongoing low-level awareness of another person's well-being that parents carry every waking hour has softened. Relief that the house belongs to you again in a way it has not for decades. And then guilt about the relief. Because feeling relieved feels like a betrayal of the love. Like you should only feel sad. Like the relief means something was wrong with you, or wrong with them, or wrong with the relationship. It does not. Relief and grief are not opposites. They can exist in the same chest at the same time. They frequently do. And feeling relieved that the intensity of daily parenting has passed does not cancel the love that made it worth doing for all those years. Both things are true simultaneously, and allowing yourself to feel both is not disloyalty, it is honesty. And honesty is the only thing that actually leads anywhere useful during this kind of transition. So what actually helps? And again, I want to be honest here. Not offer the easy answers that sound reassuring but miss the actual wound. The first thing that genuinely helps is resisting the urge to fill the silence immediately. There is a very natural, very understandable impulse to fill the quiet as fast as possible, to say yes to every invitation, to schedule every hour, to keep the house full of noise and activity and people so that the silence never gets long enough to sit with. And some of that is fine. Social connection matters enormously during this transition. But if the filling becomes a strategy for avoiding the silence entirely, the silence simply waits, because what the silence is carrying, the grief, the identity questions, the memories in the walls, the complicated mixture of feelings, all of that needs to be felt before it can begin to shift. Silence avoided is not silence resolved. It is silence postponed. And postponed grief has a way of arriving later at unexpected moments, heavier than it would have been if you had simply just sat with it for a while. The second thing that helps is allowing the house to change. This one is smaller than it sounds, but psychologists who work with empty nesters consistently find it significant. Many parents leave their children's rooms exactly as they were. The posters on the walls, the trophies on the shelves, the bed made the same way it was made on the last morning, and there is something beautiful and completely understandable in that impulse. It is a form of preservation, of keeping the door open, of refusing to let change be permanent. But there is also a cost. When every room in the house is a museum to the way life used to be, the house stops being a place you live. It becomes a place you visit, a monument to a version of time that has ended. And you cannot build a new chapter of your life in a museum. That does not mean erasing them. It does not mean dismantling the memories or pretending the years did not happen. It simply means allowing the house to keep living, allowing it to gradually become a place that reflects who you are now, alongside who you were. Small changes first, a rearrangement, a new use for a room, a plant somewhere there was not one before. These things sound trivial, but they send a signal to the self-far that life is still moving, that the house is still a home, that what comes next is allowed to begin. The third thing, and perhaps the most important one, is understanding that what you are experiencing is not just loss. It is also transition. And transition, unlike pure loss, moves somewhere. Loss ends. Transition continues. And the direction transition moves in is not backward toward the life that existed before children, and not sideways into distraction, but forward into a version of yourself and your life that has not yet been fully imagined. That version exists. It is not a consolation prize for the life that changed. It is a genuine next chapter that contains things the years of active parenting simply did not leave room for. Interests set aside, relationships deepened, a pace of living that finally matches your actual energy, rather than the relentless demands of a household running at full speed. Most parents who move through this transition honestly, who allow the grief, resist the urge to fill the silence artificially, and give themselves genuine time to find new shape, report something that surprises them, not that they stopped missing their children. They never do, but that the life on the other side of the silence turned out to have more in it than they expected. And here is the final thing worth holding on to. The silence is not the enemy, as uncomfortable as it is, as loud as it becomes with memories and questions, and the particular grief of rooms that no longer need you the way they once did. The silence is also where you finally get to hear yourself again. For decades, the noise of active parenting, beautiful, exhausting, meaningful noise, filled every available space. Your own thoughts, your own needs, your own quiet preferences and half-formed ideas, and things you wanted to try or say or become got postponed. Again and again, reasonably, lovingly. But postponed, the silence gives them back to you, not all at once, not comfortably, not without the grief sitting alongside them, but slowly, if you let the silence be what it is rather than something to be fixed or filled or escaped. You begin to hear things you have not heard in a very long time. The sound of your own life, still here, still possible, still worth building carefully. And the children who left, they did not take that from you. They simply made enough room for you to finally find it again.